Hello and welcome to Fashion Through History, brought to you by English Heritage. I am Dr. Serena Dyer, a fashion historian, and I've come here to Boscobel House and the Royal Oak in Shropshire. Today we're going to be exploring the impact of the Civil War and the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 on fashion. And so of course our fashion icon for the day is King Charles II. But first, we're going to meet English Heritage Curator Cameron Moffat, who's going to tell us more about Charles II. Cameron, what was the connection between Charles and Boscobel?
In 1642, when Charles was only 12, the English Civil War started, which was all to do with his father, Charles I. His father was taken to court and tried for treason against the state and was executed. Charles and his mother were in exile on the continent. He and a number of troops tried to regain the throne, but it all went very badly wrong at the Battle of Worcester in September 1651. Charles peeled away from the troops with a number of close supporters, and they fled across the countryside. Boscobel House is one of the houses that gave him shelter. He spent a day hiding in a very large oak tree outside. Eventually, he escaped, went back to the continent, and spent another 9 years in exile.
And when Charles was here at Boscobel, the fashions that he would have been wearing were very different from those extravagant fashions that he would have worn as king. So let's see what kinds of things soldiers at the Battle of Worcester would have been wearing. Here to help, we have our model, Toby. Toby, are you ready to fight?
Absolutely, ready and raring, just not entirely sure what side I'm on. Am I fighting for king or parliament?
Well, actually that was a very difficult thing to tell on most 17th century battlefields. Telling friend from foe was almost impossible because they didn't have uniforms like we do today. But in 1645, the parliamentarians introduced the new model army, and they started to have uniforms. And the main element that was issued to foot soldiers in the new model army was the red jacket. Now, there's no particularly practical reason why red was chosen, other than that it was the cheapest dye colour. So you have your coat and you have your breeches, which are both made from wool. They would have been really good at regulating body temperature, maybe not so good at deflecting bullets and swords. So how does it feel? Would you be ready to join battle?
Generally, it's good. You can move in it. It's really easy to move in. The breeches, there's loads of room to be able to bend around.
Let's get you out of this and into something a bit more extravagant and see what Charles would have worn once he was restored to the monarchy.
Sounds exciting.
So Cameron, what do we know about Charles's life at court after the Restoration? Why was he called the Merry Monarch?
His court was full of what they called libertines. There was an awful lot of gambling and drinking and promiscuous behaviour going on.
So things were a lot more extravagant and opulent at Charles's court.
Very much so, yes. It was very glamorous and high profile.
Excellent. So let's see what you would have worn as king. So you're already dressed in your undergarments for this. So we've got your shirt, which would have been made out of linen. You've also, of course, got your breeches and your stockings. But what Charles really brought about in fashion change is the introduction of the three-piece suit. Now, this is such a ubiquitous part of menswear today, but we really can credit that to Charles. The big difference here was the waistcoat or vest. So that's the next part of your outfit that we're going to put on you. So the waistcoat was the most important new part of this three-piece suit. Charles decreed in 1666 this would be a new fashion at court. Now, Samuel Pepys, the famous biographer, originally was quite dubious about this in his diary, but less than a week later he wrote that everybody at court was suddenly wearing waistcoats, and funnily enough, Pepys himself then went to his tailor and ordered his own. Now, we know that Charles generally preferred plain black velvet waistcoats, but he also would have had fancy French-style waistcoats with lace and buttons and embroidery, like the beautiful example you're wearing today, Toby. So next, we have the baldric. So this was a sash that you would wear across the body and that you would carry your sword through. But we won't add the sword just yet. Next we have the sash. Now this adds a lovely pop of colour to the outfit. Because everything is such a long line, it really gives that focal point to the waist.
Perfect bow.
A lovely bow. Now we have your coat. So coats have been part of menswear for a long time. Under Charles, they become known as the justaucorps. They're again very, very long line, and they're often decorated with hundreds of buttons and buttonholes. And that's really where we can see the labour and the expense coming through in these garments. So next we have the sword. While Charles might have used this practically during the Civil War, now this is really a fashion statement. He's not going to use it to fight, he's using it as a status symbol. Now, a gentleman isn't fully dressed without his wig. We have a beautiful curly peruke or periwig, and these lustrous locks were really the finishing touch for any elite man's outfit. That really makes the look.
Sets it off.
Yes. And then finally, of course, the finishing touch, your hat. And now that you don't have to hide from the Roundheads, maybe now is the best time to go and explore the grounds at Boscobel.
Sounds like a lovely idea.
So Charles II had a huge influence on men's fashion, but women's fashion under the Restoration was changing too. Cameron, can you tell us a little bit more about life for women in Charles II's court?
Charles pulled together a court full of glamorous, interesting, clever people, and the women were expected to dress fantastically, and indeed they did, and many of the most fantastically dressed were his mistresses, like Barbara Villiers.
The Restoration saw the arrival of the mantua maker, a new maker of women's wear, the equivalent of a dressmaker. And that was because of our third look, the mantua. And here to help us, we have the lovely Kate. So at the beginning of Charles II's reign, fashions were really stiff-bodied and really constructed to fit the body. But that really changes in the 1670s. We see the introduction of the mantua, which is essentially a T-shaped, loose-fitting gown. And this means that suddenly, tailors who'd been responsible for making those close-fitting, structured garments, their skills weren't needed to make the mantua. So women who had been seamstresses making other T-shaped gowns like shifts and smocks and shirts took over the making of this new fashionable garment. And it really took off. And soon there were lots of variations and lots of exciting ways that women were wearing this new style of gown. So here we have a mantua from the end of the Stuart period. So during the reign of maybe Queen Mary or Queen Anne, Charles's nieces. And this gown was put on really similarly to what we looked at in the Georgian episode of Fashion Through History. You have stays underneath that give your body that silhouette. And then on top of those, you have the petticoat. And then you have the stomacher, which is pinned to the stays. And then the gown is put on like a coat and pinned at the front. But what's really exciting about the mantua is the back. So Kate, if I can ask you to turn around. We see that the back of the mantua has this really expansive train, and that parts of it, we're actually seeing the reverse side of the fabric. And that's because we're about to do some sartorial origami to put this into the right place. So Cameron, if you don't mind helping me, if you could reach under Kate's skirts, you'll find that there's a little loop of cord.
Oh yes.
And then if you can pull that round and just loop it on the button at the waistline. Perfect. So then we take these two wings and we bring them together here. And then we just pin them in place. So you can pin different points of it together and present it in a whole variety of different ways. So it's a really versatile gown, and I think that that's what women at the Stuart court really enjoyed about it. They could play with their fashion, do different things, show off different styles and ideas. So how do you feel? Are you ready to join the Stuart court?
Yes, I think I definitely am.
Excellent. You look ready to become one of Charles II's mistresses. The Stuart era really was a revolutionary period, both for the monarchy and for fashion. From the practicality of the Civil War uniform to the opulence of the Restoration court, fashion really reflected the political upheaval of the century. If you'd like to find out more about Boscobel House in the Royal Oak, then please go to the English Heritage website.